So welcome to Leading with Empathy and Allyship, where we have deep, real conversations about the tangible things that we can do to be more inclusive leaders in our workplaces and our communities. I'm Melinda Briana Epler, the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst, where we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, and events. And this is a safe space to learn, to build empathy for each other, and to understand those tangible actions we can all take to be better humans, to be there for each other. So if you have specific questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to those. So today we have Jeff Tidwell joining us to talk about how to address ageism in the workplace. Jeff is the CEO and co-founder at Next for Me. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back in the Change Catalyst corral again. Always.
Awesome. So Jeff, before we kind of dive in, I just want to make sure we describe ourselves for anybody who is blind or low vision or who's listening on the podcast as well. So I'm a white woman with long red hair, wearing a shirt that's not sure what to call the color. It's like a burnt orange color.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever burned oranges, but yeah. And I have black and white glasses.
Great. And I'm a white male with short hair and glasses and wearing my white Zoom shirt for today's event.
Awesome. So on screen, we have two interpreters today. Thank you to Interpreter Now for our ongoing partnership. Really appreciate you. And this is also being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So if you want to turn on captioning, just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on closed caption, or you might have to click on the More tab, depending on what your screen looks like, and then hit closed caption. Our team is behind the scenes, Juliet, Renzo, Raya, Emily, all behind the scenes doing amazing things to help make this happen. And they're also in the chat and Q&A if you have questions. And please engage with us in the chat. Share what you're learning and thinking during our conversation. It definitely helps us learn what's resonating for you. And lastly, just again, use that Q&A function. If you have specific questions, we'll definitely have time at the end. So let's dive in.
Great. I'm glad to be here. I've got a lot to say.
Awesome. I'm sure you do. And for you all, for your benefit, Jeff and I have known each other for since 2016, maybe? Something like that.
Or 17.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, was it 2017? Yeah.
I think. Yeah. I wrote my little proposal. I remember I was the LA office, and I thought, I've got something to say about this topic. And sure enough, you welcomed me to that first tech inclusion, for me anyway. And then I've been back a couple more times since we started. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you start by just telling us a bit about your story and how you came to do the work that you're doing today?
Sure. So I've been in tech probably 35 years, I think. I'm 61. I had a charmed career, and I was always, or often, the youngest person in the room. So, that's just what I was used to. And as the years went by, I suddenly started noticing some vague differences in how people were treating me, what I was being invited into, or just general feeling that I wasn't fitting in something. Couldn't figure it out, had no clue, couldn't put my finger on it. I just barreled through anyway. And then over time, it kind of made sense. And people started telling me, that this happens to them. And so I figured it out. And my first reaction was defiantly to be anti whatever they were trying to do to me. In my 20s and 30s, I was very active in gay rights movement. And, a big part of that was coming out of the closet, telling the world, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And it was also an imperative in that rights movement to say, if we don't feel good about who we are, how do we ever imagine somebody's going to accept us into their, and so that stuff gets buried in your head, and it's a strong force within you, especially if you're starting to feel a different kind of discrimination all of a sudden. And so, I have to say, part of it was I'm not the easiest person to manage, and so I wasn't sure if it was that or if it was this other thing. And it was a combination, but I'm sure that the ageism thing was starting to come on. So anyway,
I think that just to stop
yeah.
you for a second, I think that is a common thing. A lot of us have that self-doubt. Is it me, or is it the people around me? Is it the culture around me? And that is a constant kind of, I felt that as well, and kind of questioned that in myself first, and then kind of realized, oh wait, it's not just me, because it's other people that are experiencing that as well.
But it is the culture. I mean, it's really baked into us, and it has been for decades. The retirement happens this at this time, old people are like this, and things like that. So around the time that I was preparing the talk for tech inclusion called 60 and Gay in Tech, which all these things, I before I spoke, I checked in with an old friend of mine who had done a lot of public speaking. His name's Chip Conley. And so happened, Chip was just coming out of a 4-year job with Airbnb as the mentor to Brian Chesky, the CEO. And he had learned a lot about intergenerational mentoring and all of this. And he was writing a book called Wisdom at Work. And it's, the stars collided. He was creating this academy called the Modern Elder Academy and all this stuff. I told him about these ideas. He said, "We'll do something about that. Maybe, sort of a place where skill sharing happens or something like that." And so, heck yes. And so he encouraged me, invest a little to get us going. And then I realized, oh, this is bigger than this little thing that happened to me, because we're all living 20 or 30 years longer. Just this weekend, in the New York, I have all my visual aids today, but New York Times is the secrets of longevity. So over the last 100 years, we have doubled our capacity or our life experience. We're all living twice as long as we used to. And for us in this realm right now, it's maybe 20 or 30 years longer. And with the savings rate of, at least in America, of, some say it's half of people over 50 have less than $50,000 saved, or whatever this retirement thing is supposed to be. And we all know one medical thing can blast that out. So what we learned from that is that we're all going to have to keep working longer. And to work longer in a workplace that is not welcoming, or doesn't even entertain the idea of hiring you, that's difficult, right?
Yeah.
And so we were off to the races, and we started a weekly newsletter and events and all this stuff. And we realized soon that the doom and gloom message was not what people wanted to hear. Not to mention the fact that there was already a target on their back, they felt, and some insecurity about keeping work going, that by telling the world about Next for Me and all this important information, they were not going to put that target on their back. And so we listened, and we opened it up in a lot of ways to be about change and how you navigate transition and that sort of thing. So it applies to people of all ages, but especially vital to this demographic.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about ageism and kind of how it shows up. What is it? What is, can you talk a little bit more about your own experience? Yeah.
Well, much of it is so subtle that you couldn't put your finger on it. And this is the problem. And and lawsuits and trying to go to court about these things. And not to mention that the onus is on the employee to report ageism instead of the employer. So that makes it difficult not to. And on top of that, do a lawsuit, you'll never work again, all those kinds of things. So it shows up in a lot of different ways. Most notorious example of this, which has been written about, was IBM, who had this seniority alignment program, is what they called it. And systematically over 5 years, I think, they had been laying off like 3/4 of their workforce since the 80s anyway. But, I'm sure they got some McKinsey bros in there that said, you got to adjust this if you want to be innovative and compete with Silicon Valley. So they were, finding very creative ways of getting rid of people. And ProPublica did this amazing reporting on that experience. And, they had to face the courts and pay some money out and things like that. So people are becoming more careful only when it hits the bottom line. But it is, once again, it is so embedded in our culture and even in ourselves, right? We believe these things that have been drilled into our head our whole lives, that, older people are not technically adept and slower and we cost more because we have to take care of our parents who are aging and all this stuff. All that is not true really, but it's baked in. And so you're not always sure when you're seeing it, and that's why I advocate in a lot of ways for stirring it up in your own workplace, and not to be confrontational necessarily, but to start showing the world what it's like when multiple generations interact, because they're more productive and more successful and they're happier. So that's how it will get through, because I just don't imagine and don't see it happening in HR departments where they're going to start addressing. We did a great tour at the last tech inclusion job fair, and here's Google and Yelp and all these big companies that were there recruiting. And here we were at a diversity and inclusion conference, and we walked around and asked everybody if age was a factor in their D&I programs.
Yeah.
Nobody. They backed off. They were like, "Uh-oh, who's this guy, and why is he asking us this?" So, for a lot of good reasons, people of color, LGBTQ, everything, the spectrum we are all familiar with, needed a seat at the table. But our contention is, you take a marginalized group to begin with, add ageism on top of that, and that's a double whammy. We're going to have to bring this into the conversation, just because of the sheer numbers of people. Half of the people over 25 are over 50. There's a shortage of work. There's reasons, that they're going to need us, and of course they need our wisdom.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I have my executive coach who I've worked with off and on for many years told me once that if I ever need a project where I could use a whole bunch of badass women in tech, she knows them, because there's so many women who are laid off after the age of 50 in tech.
Yep.
And
it's amazing.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about why it's, you talked a little bit about why it's important. You started to touch on this, but why is it important to address for companies? Obviously for individuals, when we need the work, and most people, in addition to, I think, some of the things you talked about, I think there's a lot of people that haven't put in place retirement plans and things like that until they get a little bit older too. That's kind of shifting as well. And we have more debt earlier on in life that we have to pay before we can do that, right? And yeah.
And so, families now have this enormous college debt. Last recession, a lot of those kids came home again, and so they're parenting all over again. And so that's strange. And instead of empty nest that had happened for so many years, a lot of kids couldn't afford it, with the college debt and every other thing it costs to live in the world. So they came home, and that was, a change in plans as well. A lot of people have dropped out of the workforce in the last year, or had to for any number of reasons we know, and now they're trying to re-enter the workforce. And my favorite story of the last couple of weeks is a woman wrote a piece on Medium, and she had been an executive at Starbucks, and she took 10 years off to have and raise her kids, and she was getting ready to go back into the workplace again, and she was going to update her profile on LinkedIn. And so she was going to add this job, mom, in there, what she had been doing for the last 10 years. Not a category, did not exist on LinkedIn. The closest thing they suggested to her was homemaker, which is just unbelievable.
Wow.
And so 1950s, I don't know how that has gone on for years and years and years. And there was no way to document what I had been doing in this 10 years, that, you don't have to explain a lot. You can just say, I was raising my kids. So that got changed. And that got changed because somebody used the tools of the internet and said, I got something to say about this. It got enough attention that change happens. And that's how change does happen. And so the thing that I encourage people to do is to write about what you're doing, let the world know where your head is with respect to these kind of topics or anything else in your career, because you need that edge to begin with. It's not going to change, I don't believe, in my lifetime. I am, been wrong before, but it's really slow, and it's going to take a generation to unlearn all of this that has been with us. And when they, when the next generation sees people living to 90 and 100, they're going to say, wow, I've got a lot more to go. I'm going to have to navigate the world of work, and hopefully it's going to be open to me. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Do not look behind the curtain. Yeah. There we go. Okay.
And I think, it's just something to think about too, is there's a lot of parents, even just over the last year, that have taken themselves out of the workforce to take care of their children during the pandemic, or their parents during the pandemic. And so there's going to be an additional number of people going back into the workforce in the coming year or two. Something for us all to keep in mind, and for companies to keep in mind too, that you need to start, well, you should have already, but now is a good time to start talking to your hiring teams about, looking at that gap in the resume and ignoring it, or valuing it even.
Yeah, there's all kinds of thinking about it. And there's a lot of people will hack off, huge decades of work off of their LinkedIn profile, or the year that they graduated, because it's so real. And there's in hiring, there's a lot of AI at work now. So it looks for keywords, it looks for dates, it looks for schools. And just like some of the beasts of AI are rearing their heads, this is one of the things. Who programmed this, and what bias are they throwing into these algorithms to select people in the way that they do? Just have a conversation about the possibilities. So that's to concern yourself with too.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about the benefits, and why is it important for companies to address ageism, to really work on this?
There is a ton of knowledge and qualities that come over time. such as pattern recognition. I've been in this situation 20 times. My example is I always worked on community products through my career. And so how many times have we tried to figure out what you call the menu item that is community, right? It's like, I've done this 20 times. Let me tell you the highlights and maybe we can work from there. So, these things come in and a younger person might not know how to navigate the politics in an office. And if you're working together with them, you might be able to help them a little bit too. And if there's something that they're digitally native with, maybe they can help you in that way. So
kind of mutual mentorship and
make that happen. If it doesn't exist in your workplace, either find an external mentoring program, and there's so many great ones out there. And I personally have loved every experience I've had. It taught me so much. Find one outside of the workplace. See if you can begin one at the workplace, or informally just ask, Joe over there if he wants to go have lunch, instead of surrounding yourself with people who are just like you all the time. You'll be surprised what happens. And beyond that, it is, these social things that happen in companies, drinking, ski weekends, all this sort of stuff. Well, that does not necessarily gel with all demographics that work in your office. So, maybe you still have that, but maybe you should also consider something that is outside of that sort of, I'm 25 and want to drink all weekend or something like that. So that's a way. And, is there, do you have a publishing platform internally that you could raise this? So these are all the subversive ways I think that you can start changing hearts and minds, and even just awareness, because, understandably, people are up to here trying to deal with all their DNI stuff, but this is going to bite someday. And why not be a leader and say we were all over this, and I hope that's how things begin to change.
Yeah. And the data is there to show that intergenerational teams are, more productive, more innovative, more adaptive. The data is there. It's, so it's good for business as well, and certainly good for morale and as well. And nobody wants to be afraid that they're going to be fired or let go because of their age. Yeah.
Right.
And you start to cover identity, as we all know, that takes extra energy. And there's of course an intergenerational effect to that as well, that women tend to be more penalized for their age as well, and that women of color again, and
so women are already marginalized. Older women are double marginalized. Just piles up after a while. But I'm encouraged. There are some programs that are happening in different companies. Procter & Gamble has something called the Golden Return or something like this, and they'll bring in people who have retired or semi-retired and throw them in the middle of meetings that are not necessarily their discipline, but what they're bringing to the table is their experience with the company, their experience in solving problems and being innovative against, a set of requirements and things like that. And they're successful. So there's some of those that are happening. The ones I hear most about are for people who have already retired, and they'll bring them back in as sort of oh, look who's here, it's good old Joe. But not a focus on how are we going to make this team intergenerational. And so we'll work on that.
I'm going to just jump off screen for 1 second because I have these people away from me, but I wanted to just mention that Jeff just has 2 books.
Yes, I'm very proud. With our co-founder Carol McManus is the co-author of those. And you know what the process is like. It was, we led with a book about startups, because we were a startup that had this mission, and we thought we had learned some things. And just as soon as it got published, we said, you know what, this is a bigger thing than just about startups, just about people of a certain age. It is about the skills to surf transitions, and that's what we try to help people do. We can't solve the HR issues, and we can't. This is hard for me to say, but I don't think I can change the world completely, but I do know that I can, from what I've learned in my experiences, is help people navigate what they're going through next. And that begins, in the book, is we start with your philosophical center. That is, what are my values? What is my mission? Who are the kind of people that I want to associate with? And you write that down, and you improve it, and you refine it. And once you have that foundation, then we throw you into ways to sort of think outside of the patterns that you've been accustomed to. So if you think you want to be a potter and open a retail shop or something, write what that looks like. What does that visually feel like? Or put a bunch of Post-its on the wall and organize the different responsibilities of running a pottery shop and things like that. And what happens is you get exposed to things that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And so it's, I call it tricking the mind, so you're just kind of fooling yourself, and you recognize things when you see them and all that. And then finally that's all good and well, as I'm sure people in the chat are saying, but I got a mortgage, I've got, these obligations. So we really encourage you to keep your day job. And as you go through this, to figure out how to do things yourself, because you might not have the budget, we all are entrepreneur types around here. And you've got to do a lot of things that you used to have somebody else do for you, and in the corporate world or what have you. So,
right.
So,
right. You have to go back and do everything.
So, it's a very simple guidebook to realigning what you're thinking about and who you are, all that stuff.
I think it's important for people, for us to talk a little bit about how experiencing ageism kind of affects you. I think that's important, and some of the things that you kind of address indirectly and directly in your book. So what are some of the things that that people go through and as they experience ageism?
Insecurity, stress about, what's my future, anxiety, all of those things. And on top of that, no matter what age you are, since 2007, things have really accelerated. In this book Tom Friedman wrote, thank you for being late. He talks about this tsunami of things that have happened. In 2007, it was the iPhone, it was cloud computing, it was AI, it was climate change, and it has thrown people off balance. And so they feel, as well as the stress, anxiety, insecurity, they're also off balance because the world has accelerated so much. And, there's questioning about, is that because I am how old I am or whatever? Well, truth is, no, everybody feels this thing that's moving too fast. And so, philosophically, it is, can you surf? Can you ride in the center of the storm while all this is going on around you, get clear and take action in a way that will bring you to what's next for you? And that's learned behavior. And sometimes it is, that's California speak, or that's, navel gazing and all that stuff. But, we're confronted with this big challenge here. Let's try some other techniques that may have escaped you along your path, and try new things and find ways to get clear about where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think also there's, for a lot of people I've talked with about this, it's also the feelings of shame and also betrayal that you gave your entire career to an industry, to a company, and suddenly you're kind of ousted because of, you're not relevant anymore. They're saying you're not relevant anymore. They're casting you aside when you put so much in.
Tons of shame,
Yes.
tons and tons of shame when
Yeah.
you're taught that at this age this should have happened and this should have happened, and for whatever reason it might not be. There's shame associated with that, and I should have had this much money. Well, things happen, or whatever. And so you got to shake that stuff off, and that's where the self-reflection comes in, and say, what, that happened, but at the end of the day, I'm this and this and this, and I'm going to go out and do it again.
Yeah. And I think, so it's kind of thinking about what we can do as allies for people who are experiencing ageism. I think one of them is definitely valuing experience, valuing somebody's unique, and the breadth and depth of their experience, I think is really, really key here, as well as kind of being there and knowing that people are going through those emotions, those feelings, that trauma, and helping navigate that.
Right. And noticing people is a real good place to start. You've heard the expression, I became invisible,
Mhm.
walking down the street in my 20s, everybody's looking at me and whistling or what have you. Well, maybe not that, but and then suddenly it's like I could walk right into somebody's face and they wouldn't see me. So acknowledging someone in your circle is a big step, and taking time to listen to what they've got to say and where they are and where they've been. And I bet you're going to learn something out of that, and I bet they're going to learn something out of that. And that's just a critical part of expanding your network. Your network is going to become richer and more informed with a variety of people in it, rather than people who are just like you. And we all know that the network is how you keep getting work, right? It's who who you've worked with. Have you kept those relationships alive in some way? And for people to get older, some of them, they say their network has aged out, and that means they died, or they're no longer involved in the work that you all did. So you've got to replant seeds, if you that metaphor, to keep people freshly entering your world and your intellect and the way that you think.
Yeah. If anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll definitely make sure we address those. So please do put your questions there. So and so some of those kind of deep feelings of trauma, I think, and working through those, how you work through those, some of that is in your book, talking about new perspectives and kind of open-mindedness, and then vulnerability, I think, is a part of this that you kind of touched on earlier in our conversation, that as you were an activist, kind of coming out was a key piece of the activism, and here we have vulnerability, and kind of as we kind of work through this, I think owning that too is important.
Yeah. And it's a very hard thing to talk about because of all that baggage too. And so being vulnerable is kind of hard. So that's why you want allies in these relationships that you're developing over time. So, if you do want to break down about this and, say the impact that it's having on your family and your mental health and all of that, who can you go talk to about that? If you kind of set your network up in a healthy way, those people will be there waiting for you, and you can do the same for them.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to kind of touch on in terms of you have two books, and so one thing we didn't really talk about is one is for specific. You can say it. What are the two different books?
Yeah. So we did the book about startups. A lot of this material made its way into the second. Most of the material made it in, but we said this is not just about startups. Though, if you are thinking about going down that path, it's not a bad book for that, because it asks you to do all these same techniques about this thing that's next for you, which is your little company and all of that. A lot of people are, especially in Silicon Valley where you're based, and your entrepreneurship to many means, raising money and doing these kinds of things instead of creating a business that can sustain you over time.
Mhm.
And so that's why we talk about these things. How can I stay standing long enough so I can see this goal or let this thing evolve into what it's going to evolve into? And then the second one, A Guide to Change for Everybody, says, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, if you're thinking about where you're going next, try these things. And so we've done them in online courses on Udemy through a platform called Amava. We do workshops around this stuff and for HR and executives understanding the 50 plus workers. So we've done a lot of research around that too and published some things. So that's a way to get inside of the minds of this generation and how it can work for you and your company.
Awesome. Leva asks in the chat, are there better industries for older job seekers? And I will say, probably not tech. And I would, in the tech industry, pretty much anybody over age 35 is underrepresented, and there's very little. Still, sometimes age is now tracked. Some companies are now tracking age as a part of the diversity demographics, and a few are working on it, but not a lot yet.
Right. I mean, a lot of people reach a point where they say, I'm going to do my own thing. It's like I send out a million resumes on these online systems. I never hear a word. I don't know how to break through this. Not to mention, I'm really good at something now after having done it for all these years, and I want to apply that to my new thing. Or there's a million life coaches out there in this age bracket too. But I poo-poo tech with respect to all of this, but there are also some of the more progressive people doing business in the world, not always with respect to letting meanies on their platform and stuff like that. But I was around some of the early technology periods, and it was about giving voice to people that didn't have it, and it was about changing the power structures and everything. So if by the time you cycle through to your next thing, you might be surprised what's happening in tech and how you could make inroads into it if you had the right allies and your network was expansive enough that you could start engaging with them and saying, listen, I know this is a hard sell for people, but how can we do this? And inch by inch is how this changes over time. So if tech's your thing, don't give up on that. Look for a company that is evolved or is open to being evolved, and maybe you can find your way too. But tech's what I know. But there's a ton of other fields. Medical professionals are in such demand now that's an environment where you see a lot of people that are older than 40. And so these are places to start, but you'll know that by doing the homework to get there, and doing that when you're looking for a job or feeling pressure at work is kind of hard, but clear the decks and do what you can.
Yeah. Gina asks, do you find remote environment to feel more welcome for ageism? Has it changed?
I have heard that from people, they turn the camera off, and so that doesn't enter in, and it is just their voice uh, being exposed, and so especially all kinds of remote work that doesn't require people to be in the office anymore, or offline, or rather remote tech support, or all these kinds of things, customer service work, things like that. Yeah. So the answer is it is easier remotely, but if imagery is the issue, there's nothing more brutal than a Zoom camera to how you look some days, or the lighting, or what have you. And so, and you miss so much about the natural give and take with humanity in a face-to-face meeting, that it's hard, and especially if you're trying to sell yourself into something.
Yeah, when you're starting something new, yeah, for sure. Melissa just asked a quick question. Who is next for me for? Is it for people feeling burned out and over 40, or who's it for?
It is for anyone who wants to transition to what's next for them. I hope that's not too vague, but if you have been thinking that there is something else you'd like to do in your life, whether it's work, whether it's your relationship, or what have you, how do people who succeed in transitioning do it? So those are the stories that we publish. Those are the people we bring to our events. We're doing live events again starting in October, which is very exciting. We used to do this all the time. And on October 12th in New York, and DC on the 14th. And we're bringing into, New York Times best-selling authors who are writing about this topic, 50 plus employment, and the deputy editor of Newsweek as the person who will be facilitating the conversation. So that's exciting, and that is us trying to stick our foot in it and elevate the topic a little bit as best we can. And so when we did events before, some are about there's this whole industry called the longevity economy, believe it or not, where people are trying to capitalize on all this, but that's fine. And so some of the events are more for that sort of inner circle of people trying to innovate in there. And then we at one point we did 3 nights in Ohio, Chicago, or I'm rather Cleveland and Dayton and Cincinnati, and that was more for people who are like us and are thinking about doing something new. And because of the shame, because of the anonymity they could get in these environments, I mean, the emotions were flowing, and people were breaking down and telling their stories. And so we hope that we can help people with that conversation. And it's often best when it's anonymous for the reasons we talked about before, because they could be exposed as that person who may not be hireable because of their age.
Yeah. Madeline asked a question: how do I intervene if I see ageism in the workplace? I've seen resources on intervening for racism and sexism, but ageism can sometimes be harder to pinpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, raise your voice if you're comfortable. As I said, I don't think a lot of people recognize they're doing it when they're doing it sometimes. And, all of the age-defying, Botoxing, hair coloring issues aside, we're going to have to start changing that conversation. And so if you're comfortable in the workplace, do it. Maybe talk to the person that happened to afterwards and ask them how they felt, and if you can, help them in any way. But at some point, this is going to have to be brought up, and the sooner the better. And it's probably going to start as a grassroots thing, and by people feeling they've got the power to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to kind of recognize that it comes out just like any ism. It comes out in lots of different ways. It comes out in the biases that contribute to making decisions about people. And it comes out in microaggressions as well. And in a key piece of, when it comes out in microaggressions is it's often invisible. You have to make it visible as a part of kind of intervening, right? And so, yeah, as Jeff says, is if you're comfortable, call it, call somebody in, right, versus calling out and really let them know that is ageism and why it's important to counteract it, to change that verbalization and rethink things. And then it also comes out in our systems. The biases contribute to our systems and how we make decisions on hiring. So a big thing I think you can do as an ally is to advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion programs to include ageism in the work that they're doing. So that hiring practices, you have that lens of ageism as well as racism, sexism, ableism, heterosexism, et cetera, that you're also looking at ageism and making sure that you're countering any biases there, promotions and as well as making, those the layoff decisions and all of those things that's at the systemic level of change of really working to address ageism in those as well as racism and sexism and ableism and all
I mean,
racism.
when's it going to blow up in a way that Black Lives Matter, for example, has with all the killings in the last couple of years? And what was the boiling point? This had been going on for years. Was it the camera moment? I think so. That became so apparent, even though people knew it was happening, even though they participated in it, that they finally said, okay, this has gone on long enough. So I don't know what it's going to be here. And so that's why you start at the grassroots level. And if anybody needs some material to go into your company with, I've got tons of it. Jeff at nextforme.com. I can lay out a couple pages of stats for you that should blow their mind and make them uncomfortable, which is probably what it's going to take.
Well, I was going to ask you where people can learn more about your work. I think that's you kind of answered that. Yeah.
Nextforme.com, and weekly newsletters going out every Tuesday for 3 years. So hundreds of articles and podcasts and videos and all of that too. And we've had great chance to interview people who have gone through transitions in all kinds of environments. First, how did she make it through? One of our advisors lost her husband, her mother, her best friend, I think all in 7 months. And she just walked out of her high profile job and said, you know what, I'll see you later. I have to do something different. Obviously, there's been enough upheaval in my life that I'm going to go figure out what's next for me. And that's not going to happen here. Stories like that, they're really amazing to see the people who have made it through.
And Jeff, looking back at your own experience in the workplace, where would you have wanted allies to step up for you?
Yeah. I think it's the microaggression stuff. That's a great starting point. I have a dear friend, God bless him, but he calls me grandpa all the time. And I think it's a hoot, and we laugh about it and everything. But that's a perfect example. It's like it's okay to make a joke about older people. you do that about any other marginalized class, and man, the slapdown happens right away. So it's those kinds of things that happen a lot, and so fight back a little bit and say, that's BS where you're headed here. You wouldn't say that about X now, would you?
Mm-hmm.
Things
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what would you say to somebody who is going through some ageism now, kind of for the first time?
Yeah. Get somebody to talk to. So it's just not you. And I think that's, professional therapist of some kind, or executive coach like you have, whether it's executive or whatever role you have in the world. But you need to talk to somebody about it, or you'll start thinking it's all about you, and it's not. It's them so much of the time, or the system that they operate in. And so that's what I recommend. And be reflective, spend time with yourself, do all those wellness things, so that you have at least a fresh mind when you're going into this thing, and you know what's real and what's just your mind overworking.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you. Thank you for being you, for doing the work that you do, and for this discussion.
I feel the same about you, and I'm happy to do this and to talk to anybody who is in the audience today. I really appreciate this. It's great to talk about and get clear about it every day, and maybe you will too if you start having the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. And thank you everybody for your questions, for your comments. Appreciate you all. And my question for you today to kind of think about are, have you thought about the subtle biases you might have based on somebody's age? And then what are you going to do about that? How are you going to filter those? What are you going to do? How are you going to rethink your own approach? And then, if you've already thought about all those things, of course, what action will you take as an ally? So
that's why we're here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So join us each week, and please share this with your colleagues. You can find previous podcast episodes at changecatalyst.co/allyship series. And this episode will be up next week as a podcast if you want to share it with your networks. And also, please find this episode on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, and then like it, subscribe to it, so that we can continue to grow our audience. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.